challenging things that I'm starting to experience as my children get a little bit older and approach being teenagers is when you witness them grieving their difference. I had an experience earlier this year where one of my daughters was tearful, and I asked her what it was, and she bravely disclosed that she didn't like being deaf. And this is in spite of having a family that's been so purposeful in embracing it and celebrating it and having her exposed to deaf people and deaf role models. But the reality is that at times she wished she heard life like me. And she also has other feelings about how she might be making my life difficult because she can see all the advocacy that I have to put into her education, etc. How can we support our children through the time of questioning their own identity, questioning the feelings that they are experiencing in a place where they feel acknowledged and heard and are allowed to feel all the different things, but also in a way that frames it healthily for them?
I think you mentioned the word communication. Communication, just in general, not just within a family context or within any kind of specific relationship, is just such a pivotal part of being real in a difficult world sometimes. And it's hard often for us as adults to say we're not okay, and even more so for children. We always want to start those conversations with children by saying, thank you for telling me how you feel, thank you for letting me into your world a little bit. It's a good idea to ask questions so you can get them to express more about what they're feeling. Like, tell me, how does that feel? Explain to me what happens when. What do you think would be more useful to get that communication going? To listen, to provide a space for them to listen, to really at all costs avoid saying that word, I know this is hard for you, I know it must be difficult. You don't know, you can never know. It's them in their world, it's their reality. So you want to provide that space for them to talk about how they're really feeling, to encourage them, to thank them, to be fully present with them in a moment when they have that all fall down. It's also really, really important for you to enable them to see the individual that they are. Yes, they are deaf. Again, it's a fact in a current reality that can't be changed. They are also so much more than deaf. And often children need encouragement and need to be shown how to look beyond that. So tell me about your personality, about your favorite food, about things that you like and don't like, what some of your hobbies are, to get them to see, yes, they are deaf. Yes, it is hard in a way that you can never know or fully understand or even appreciate. There is so much more to an individual, though, just than being that one thing. So tell me about being brave. Tell me about being inquisitive, favorite subjects, ideas of what you might like to do and be in the future. Identity is such an important part of an individual. Being able to answer the question, who am I? We're never just one thing. We might be deaf, we might be anxious, we might be frightened. That's one part of who you are. It doesn't define who you are. It's not a label you stick on yourself in terms of limiting yourself to be only that one thing. So it's really important with children that you allow them space to be broken sometimes, to be with them in that space, and then to encourage them to move beyond that in terms of who else they are, what else they are besides that.
That's really helpful. I think particularly in the deaf space, a big challenge is communication. There are many families who don't know how to ask their child what they want for dinner. So having the heart-to-heart conversations about who they are would be really difficult. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why we need to do everything we can to support parents in learning whatever they need to do to communicate with their child. And that goes back to acceptance. I know parents get a lot of criticism for not learning sign language, for example, if that's the mode of communication that is chosen to be best fit for their child. And I personally think that some of the reasons as to why they don't learn a fluency in something like South African Sign Language for us here in South Africa is because they're afraid and they're stuck in the early stages of the grieving process and maybe haven't reached a place of acceptance which is also coupled with confidence in their own ability in their journey. So I think professionals also just need to remember that for a child, they are so much more than their ears. Being able to give them good audiological services, being able to implant them, give them hearing aids is just one small component. They're so much bigger than that. And if one is prioritizing their ability to be their best versions of themselves, one needs to think of the importance of tapping into their emotional needs, which the crux is communication. And so creating resources for parents and opportunities and support that enables them to learn to communicate with their child is really important. I've also done a bit of thinking about protective factors that we can institute in our own lives to see our children supported in a healthy way. Some of them might be, again, community, having your child part of a community, and for some it might be the deaf community, for others it might be your immediate community. Having other safe adults that they can go to that understand them. And again, this might be quite important if in a family you uses a different language, the home language of the family. For example, you might find a deaf person who can communicate fluently with a child, and the mom can be part of that almost triangle of communication if that's what they need at that time. But other people that your child can go to and confide in and feel safe with. And then peers. I think it's so important for the sense of belonging that children and teenagers have peers that they feel accept them for who they are, and for us as parents to do whatever we can to nurture those relationships with them, because they don't always come easily. At schools, for children that are in a mainstream setting, break time where they socialize and form those connections are often really difficult because of the noise and people talking all at once. So I think there are a few protective things, and again, the role models. It's so vital for children to see versions of their future self and possibilities. And in today's world, we have access to global opportunities for role models because of YouTube and other social media platforms to find heroes that they can have that are deaf, who they think would understand, and people that they would look up to. I just think that also just frames for the child the aspect of what they might sometimes perceive as a loss to a superpower and a gain, which might just be part of nurturing well-being, holistic well-being for the child, and not just the fact that they can hear and have an audiogram that we've all hoped for. So I think professionals would do well in viewing the child as a whole being and not just a set of ears.
Absolutely. It's really important that we do our best to dispel any negative or limiting self-beliefs that a child may take on by virtue of the fact that they have a disability, which is why we want them to be able to see a future role models, people who have overcome and exceeded and succeeded. It's really important that we provide children with that ability to dispel those negative and limiting self-beliefs. I just wanted to reflect again on communication. A lot of people think about communication in the sense of the spoken word. Communication so much more than that. And often when people and our children communicate difficult things to us, we can feel quite inadequate as a parent, where we go to that place of, well, I don't know how to fix this. Remember, we don't want to go to a how question. What can I do and who can help me? And sometimes the best form of communication is just to be present or just to hold somebody. Sometimes it can be to draw a picture. Sometimes it can really just be to sit next to somebody, to be present. And we don't want to, as a parent, even though we might feel inadequate in that space, we need to just know that sometimes we don't have the right words. We don't know what to say or what to do, and that's okay. Sometimes all we need to do is just be. And then to encourage ourselves in that moment. I might feel inadequate. Feeling something and being something are two completely different things. And it's okay to feel inadequate. To know that you're not inadequate. You have everything you need in you to be in that moment with that child and to move on from that.
When you mentioned barriers or boundaries or challenges that children might overcome, I just want to enforce that we're referring that to exactly that, the barriers. We're not expecting to overcome their deafness as part of who they are, and we hope that they eventually celebrate that. But it's more about the struggles that children who are different will face simply by virtue of the fact that they're living in a hearing world. And I also think that one of the protective things that we as parents or friends or family, people that know and have insight into the well-being of a child who is deaf or different, is the way we model speaking about them. It is easy to have someone meet me for the first time with my girls and mention that they're deaf, or maybe they don't know how to talk about it, and they might say something like hearing impaired, and in our context that's not one of the words that we want to use, but it might be appropriate in other places. Or they might say abnormal. I've had someone say that to me before. I've had someone tell me or ask me, how can someone be so unlucky to have 3 children with disabilities? And it is awkward to breach that and approach that in a healthy way in the moment with that person. But I think it's worth practicing, and I think it's worth having a few comebacks that show your child how they are to think of themselves, or to internalize a narrative that's in opposition of the negative narrative that they've just experienced. So things like just being able to say, this is my son or my daughter, and yes, they are deaf, and to be completely comfortable with using words like that. And yeah, they've got a cochlear implant, or we use sign language. Would you like to have a sign, or can my child give you a sign name? And just normalize it instead of tiptoe around this awkwardness because of the other person's awkwardness. I think it's okay to correct people politely in front of your child, so that they can see the way that you see them, so that the way that you see them and the way that you speak of them becomes their inner voice about the way they see themselves. So I really think it's important for parents to consider the words that they use to describe their child, and the words that they use, especially to talk about their child in front of their child. And it's okay for us to challenge ourselves about the notion of normal, for example. And I think sometimes using words like typical and just words that embrace everything as being a spectrum of normality are sometimes helpful in the way parents perceive and can reframe the way that they speak of it, because it changes the way that the child thinks of it too.